Hey, welcome to another episode of Coffee and HEMA with me, Jamie McKeever. I continue on talking about tournament rule design, and in a previous video, I talked about no knockout formats as this concept of having a tournament structure that doesn't result in anybody ever getting knocked out of the tournament, just not necessarily fencing for first place anymore, and how much I prefer those. And related to that, this video, I want to talk about the difference between having later rounds as pools versus later rounds as kind of elimination structures or single match structures. And I want to talk about a very specific aspect of that, which is something for people to consider. So, again, I've said this a few times, and I'm sure most people know the normal, still default way people organize tournaments is you have a pool round where you're allocated, normally seated in a group of something like 5 to 7 people, and you fence everybody in that group. And then in a later stage, you go into a knockout format, whether that's single or double elimination, normally single, where you fence a person, and if you win, you go ahead, and if you lose, you don't go ahead, right? And putting aside whether people get knocked out of the tournament or not, because I think that's a different problem, I've already discussed that. There are reasons why you might want to do away with elimination structures, and there are reasons why you might want to keep them, even if later rounds are still knocking people out. So other options you can do, there's kind of 3 options really that boil down to the several things, right? Once people go through to the second round, or the second, or the third, or subsequent round, right? The elimination structure is the common one, right? You have a defined tree that you get matched up based upon your position on the tree, and whether you win, you go to the next level of the tree, right? Whether you have double elimination or whatever, it doesn't matter, right? Same basic concept. The other common one that people you see is the second round being a pool round, right? There you have another round of pools. It might not be everybody anymore. There might be a different size pool or whatever happens to be. And it might be not just one round of pools. It might be 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it happens to be. But you once again go into a pool where you fight everybody in that pool, right? And you kind of move forward. And I've seen that go all the way up to the finals, where the final is not 2 people fencing. It's a pool of 3, and the ranking at the end of it kind of determines who wins, who loses. And who gets bronze, silver, gold, right? And then the third option, which I like, which is kind of just a less knockouty version of elimination trees. You can do a Swiss round there as well, where the Swiss round is what determines to the finals. The nice thing about the Swiss round is that actually, in terms of the gold medal matches, you can, if you organize it well, you can make it so that that is essentially your final. So actually, the people who are going for medals have to win all their Swiss rounds to get there. In which case, their experience is basically the same as an elimination tree. Like every loss means you can't win, but if you do lose, you've still got some other fights to do to kind of fight for other positions. So it's kind of a no knockout style of elimination, which is more fun. Whether you opt for pools or whether you opt for eliminations, and Swiss is somewhere in the middle, has a quite significant consequence of your other rules. So often people have fairly complex rules about advancement. What gets you to go to the next stage, and normally it's something like wins are the primary criteria, but then score difference matters. Sometimes it's just score difference. I've had that before, where it's just the difference in score that makes a difference about whether you advance or not. I might talk about that in the video as well. So, winning by 3 is way better than winning by 1 in that situation. Or in both situations, it gives you some advantage. It could also be like how many times you've been hit is the second criteria, or even the first criteria. And all of these are intended to promote and reward specific kinds of fencing over just win whatever strategy wins, right? So it matters if you win without getting hit in some cases, or it matters if you win by a commanding lead, hitting more, whatever it happens to be. If you think that's important and you like that, the problem is, and you think that encourages a certain kind of behavior, the problem is, once you then go to an elimination round, none of that incentive structure was there, right? Because once you hit elimination, the only thing that matters is whether you win or lose. Everything else is irrelevant. And I've seen this before, with Dublin tournament, Fane and they did this where in the advancement criteria was not wins, but the margin of win. Or actually, sorry, it was the score difference. So if you lose by 1, that is way less bad than losing by 7, right? And it's had a fixed number of exchanges as well, which kind of contributed to that. And that really punished fencers who doubled a lot, and it rewarded clean fencers who still lost for reasons, right? I'm not going to go into the rules for Felon Nagaski if I remember that this is like 5 years ago. And we had this, right? You know, and I was in the second category. Like I lost a couple fights, but they were close losses, and my fights were very clean. So actually, I did pretty well. You know, not at the top of the. I was kind of middle of the pack of people who advanced, and you had a few fencers who were very doubly, but just scraped through, and were that's the bottom, the bottom seed, as it were. Of course, in an elimination bracket, you do top to bottom, and what that ended up happening was there were quite a few kind of upsets because the people who came in at the top now faced these very doubly fencers who were punished in the pool structure because of the scoring, but now all that matters is they win by a point or whatever it happens to be, and actually they did very well in the elimination structure. So all those incentives they tried to put in place were gone. So if those things are important to you, you need to consider not doing an elimination structure, but continuing the kind of formats that encourage that, which is mostly pools. Swiss system, you can kind of, Swiss system is mostly about wins. You can kind of change the structure of it, and you can make it so the secondary criteria is somewhat important, but it's much less important than the pool structure. The downside of that, though, is you do get a different dynamic. You get, I would say, you get lower stress second round fights. Whether that is a good or a bad thing, I think people can debate on that one. I'd argue that it's a good thing, but I know some people think that the stress is kind of an important kind of part of the testing process or whatever they want to call it in the tournament. And you do, though, get some weird results sometimes, right? So again, depending on what criteria you've chosen, and depending on how big the pools are, you can get situations where you have someone with fewer wins who is ranked above somebody with more wins, right? Which is what happened there. Now, is that a problem? That's up to you to decide, right? It is a consequence that you need to consider and decide whether that is something that you consider to be acceptable and right. That someone with a lot of close losses might be better than somebody with a lot of with more wins, but highly W or something like that. And normally, if wins is your primary criteria, it doesn't matter too much, right? But then it also softens the secondary effect of whatever secondary criteria that you've got. So I think Fight Camp. Did Fight Camp do it this way? I'm not sure. I think Fight Camp was just on scoring actually as well. They did when they ran tournaments, they did subsequent rounds. And I've definitely had ones before where, I had a round where I beat both fencers, but I had a highly doubly fight with one fencer. The other fencer was my student, so after I fought that fencer, I gave him tips for how to defeat this doubly fencer. So he had a very clean fight against that fencer, and then me and my student had a relatively narrow fight. It was clean, but still narrow. So that student who I beat almost went through. I think he was like 2 points behind me, despite the fact that I'd beaten both the fences in my second round. Right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? I'm saying that certainly that will be a consequence of it, and certainly some fencers will consider that to be a bad thing and be like, I should have gone through. I won all my fights, right? Bearing in mind that they probably didn't read the rules, because fencers never read the rules, so they should be wise to that being a possibility, but they probably weren't. So all of this is to say, think about it, right? And if you think your rules are such that they're going to encourage a certain kind of behavior, most of the time that is only true in the pools, and they're really rewarding that and saying who goes through, and you're only really discouraging that in the eliminations insofar as the people who behave in the way that you've punished didn't get to that point. So your elimination fights are going to be way less incentivized to fence in a particular way. They're always going to be just about, will I win? Like, how do I win? And that might be winning by getting slightly ahead and then doubling out until the game is over. if that's something that is a winning strategy on your rules, even if it was punished by scoring. So think about it when you set it up, because it matters. And personally, I prefer multiple pool rounds more because it's easier to get a balanced number of fights and make sure that people are going to get interesting matchups rather than ending on a low note when you've lost and then you're off and you never fence again. So thanks for watching.